In 1844, a 31-year-old Danish philosopher published a book about anxiety under a pseudonym. The pseudonym was Vigilius Hofniensis, the Watchman of Copenhagen. The book was called The Concept of Anxiety, and its opening argument was one of the strangest and most personally clarifying things anyone had ever said about the experience of being a human being who has to make choices. Anxiety, he said, is not caused by danger. It is not the fear of a specific threat, a nameable enemy, a concrete possibility of harm. It is something more fundamental and more difficult to address than fear, because it does not have an object in the ordinary sense. Anxiety is what you feel when you stand before your own freedom. When you look into the open space of what you could do, who you could become, which of the available paths is yours, and find, in that openness, not the liberation the culture promised, but a specific, vertiginous, deeply uncomfortable awareness that the choosing is entirely up to you. He called it the dizziness of freedom. The vertigo that comes not from the edge of a cliff, but from the realization, standing at the top of your own life, that there is no railing, that no authority, no institution, no tradition, no other person can make the choices that are yours to make, that the freedom you have been given, and it is given, inescapably, to every human being who has ever lived, is not a gift that feels like a gift in the moment of receiving it. It feels like standing at the edge of something vast, looking down, with nothing to hold on to, and the knowledge that you have to jump. He wrote this in 1844 in Copenhagen, a city that had not asked for this kind of honesty from its philosophers, and that received the book with something between incomprehension and indifference. He died 6 years later, at 42, having published more books than most philosophers produce in a full career, having spent his fortune, having broken off his engagement to the woman he loved for reasons he never fully explained, having picked a public fight with the Danish Lutheran Church that exhausted him, and that he was still conducting when he collapsed in the street in October of 1855 and was carried to a hospital where he died 5 weeks later. He was Søren Kierkegaard. He is now recognized as the founder of Existentialism, the philosopher who asked with more precision and more personal urgency than anyone before him what it actually means to be an individual, a specific, irreplaceable, anxiety-ridden, freedom-burdened, choosing human being, in a world that keeps offering you ways not to be one. There is an anxiety that most people in midlife carry that does not respond to the treatments the culture provides for anxiety. Not the anxiety of danger. Not the anxiety of a specific threat that could be addressed if only the address were found. The anxiety of possibility. The specific, persistent, deeply uncomfortable awareness that the life you are living is not the only life available to you. That you have made choices and could have made others. That you are becoming someone and could become someone different. That the future is genuinely open in ways that feel less like freedom and more like a weight you were not warned about and have not learned to carry. The productivity system does not address this anxiety because this anxiety is not a problem of efficiency. The therapy that teaches you to challenge your negative thoughts does not address it because it is not, at its root, a negative thought. It is a correct perception. The anxiety that Kierkegaard is describing is the accurate recognition of something true about the human condition, that you are free, that the freedom is real, that the choosing is entirely yours, and the specific vertigo that the accurate recognition of that truth produces in a person who is standing in the middle of a life and trying to figure out what to do with it. He is not offering to take the anxiety away. He is offering something more useful. He is offering a philosophy of what the anxiety actually is, where it comes from, what it is pointing at, and what the person who is willing to stand in it rather than flee from it might discover there. And what he discovered, in his own life, in the longest and most personal and most searingly honest philosophical investigation of anxiety that Western thought has produced, is that the dizziness is not a symptom of something wrong. It is the feeling of standing at the threshold of what is most essentially human. The feeling of being genuinely, inescapably, terrifyingly free. Søren Kierkegaard was born in 1813 in Copenhagen, the youngest of 7 children of a prosperous wool merchant named Michael Petersen Kierkegaard. His father was a man of powerful intelligence, deep religious conviction, and a melancholy so profound and so specific that it functioned in the family like a weather system, present in every room, shaping the emotional climate of every relationship, impossible to ignore and impossible to fully explain. Michael Kierkegaard believed he was cursed. He had, as a young man on the Jutland Heath, shaken his fist at God and cursed him for the hardships of his life. He had prospered afterward, spectacularly, by the standards of Copenhagen commerce, and the prosperity had convinced him that the prosperity was a punishment, that God was giving him what he wanted in this life in order to withhold what mattered in the next. 5 of his 7 children died before him. He interpreted each death as confirmation of the curse. His youngest son absorbed this theology of guilt and divine severity into his bones before he had the philosophical vocabulary to examine it. Søren was given the best education Copenhagen could provide. He studied theology at the University of Copenhagen, though theology was always, for him, a wrestling match rather than a received inheritance, the fight of a man who believed too seriously to believe simply, who could not accept the comfortable version and could not let go of the thing the comfortable version was a version of. He was brilliant and difficult and socially uncomfortable in ways that the city noticed. He wrote a dissertation on the concept of irony with continual reference to Socrates that established him immediately as a thinker of the first order. And then he fell in love. Her name was Regine Olsen. She was 17 when he met her. She was, by his own testimony and the testimony of everyone who knew them, the great love of his life. He proposed. She accepted. He broke off the engagement 14 months later, for reasons that have been analyzed by Kierkegaard scholars for 170 years without complete resolution. His own explanations are multiple and contradictory and suffused with the specific quality of a person who knows what he is doing and cannot bear what it costs, and does it anyway. The most plausible explanation, and the one that his philosophy supports most directly, is that he understood, with the painful clarity of a person who has thought too carefully about himself, that he could not be the husband she deserved while remaining the thinker he had to be. That the commitment to Regine and the commitment to the solitary, inward, profoundly unsociable practice of philosophical self-examination that his work required were incompatible at the level he understood commitment. That he chose, at 29, the work, and that the choice, the specific, irreversible, freedom-constituted choice, haunted him for the rest of his life in ways visible in nearly everything he wrote. He poured the energy of the broken engagement into writing. Between 1843 and 1846 he published, under a series of pseudonyms, a series of books that collectively constitute one of the most extraordinary bursts of philosophical creativity in Western history. Either / or Fear and Trembling, Repetition, The Concept of Anxiety, Stages on Life's Way, concluding unscientific postscript, each one a different angle on the same central question. What does it mean to be an individual? What does it mean to choose? What is the relationship between the self and the freedom that constitutes the self? And what does the anxiety that the relationship produces tell us about what we are? He published under his own name as well, religious discourses, devotional writings, the more explicitly Christian work that ran alongside the pseudonymous philosophical output and that represented, in his own understanding, the other pole of his investigation. He was not a secular philosopher who happened to use religious language. He was a religious thinker who had decided that the existing forms of Christianity had made the faith too easy, had removed the difficulty, the risk, the subjective commitment that genuine faith required, and that the task of his life was to reintroduce that difficulty to a Christendom that had forgotten it was difficult. He spent his fortune. He picked the fight with the Danish church. He collapsed in the street in 1855. He died in November of that year, 6 weeks after the collapse, at 42. He left behind a body of work that Denmark largely ignored for 30 years, that German and French philosophers discovered in the early 20th century, and that gave existentialism its founding vocabulary: authenticity, anxiety, the leap, the individual, the either/or, without which neither Heidegger nor Sartre nor Camus could have written what they wrote. The concept of anxiety is the book, but the dizziness of freedom is only the beginning of what it contains. What Kierkegaard builds from that image is a full philosophy of what freedom is, what it costs, and what the person who is willing to stand in the anxiety rather than flee from it might find on the other side. Freedom, he says, is not a property you have. It is not a condition you are in. It is a task you are given, continuously, inescapably, in every moment in which you are awake and conscious and alive. The task of choosing who you are. Not once, at a defining moment. Every day, in the specific, daily, entirely ordinary practice of the person who has understood that the self is not something you discover, it is something you make. Through the choices you make and keep making. Through the commitments you enter and the responsibilities you accept, and the specific, personal, irreplaceable way you choose to inhabit the freedom you have been given. This is what he means by the either/or, not a specific choice between two specific options. The structure of human existence itself. The fact that to choose one thing is to not choose another. That freedom and commitment are not opposites, but the same act seen from different angles. That the person who refuses commitment in order to preserve freedom has not kept their freedom. They have kept only the appearance of it. The real freedom, the freedom that constitutes the self rather than merely describing its options, is the freedom exercised in commitment, in the leap, in the choosing that is genuinely irreversible and that the person who makes it is genuinely changed by. The anxiety is the feeling at the threshold of this. The vertigo of standing before a genuine choice. One that will matter, one that will change you, one that cannot be undone, and knowing that the choosing is yours and that there is no authority to defer to, no institution to make the choice for you, no algorithm to optimize your way through it. The anxiety is the correct perception of the weight of what you are about to do. And the person who has learned to flee the anxiety, who manages the vertigo by refusing the genuine choice, by filling the threshold with distraction or deferral or the comfortable smallness of a life that never quite commits, has not resolved the anxiety. They have only ensured that it will keep returning. Because the freedom that produces the anxiety does not go away when the anxiety is avoided. It waits. And the dizziness of standing at the edge never diminishes. It only accumulates in the person who keeps refusing to jump into the specific, low-grade, permanent weight of a life that has been held in reserve. He calls the jump the leap of faith, not necessarily in the theological sense, though for him the theological sense was always present, in the universal human sense. The willingness to commit fully to something, a relationship, a vocation, a set of values, a way of being in the world, without the guarantee of certainty, without proof that the commitment is the right one, on the grounds of the choosing itself, which is the only grounds available, which are sufficient, which are all that genuine human existence has ever had to stand on. Now the bridge. Because Kierkegaard was a 19th century Danish Lutheran philosopher writing in the specific context of post-Hegelian European philosophy and Christian existentialism, and most of the people watching this video are navigating a different world. But here is what has not changed since 1844. The experience of standing at the threshold of a genuine choice and feeling the vertigo is available to every human being in every century. The midlife awareness that the life you are living is the sum of choices you have made, and that the choices still ahead are genuinely yours, not your institutions, not your cultures, not the algorithms, is exactly the dizziness Kierkegaard described. The specific, uncomfortable, thoroughly modern experience of being offered unlimited options and finding that the unlimited options produce not freedom but paralysis is the Kierkegaardian diagnosis of the present moment, written 180 years before the present moment existed. And the answer he offers, the leap, the commitment, the willingness to choose genuinely and be genuinely changed by the choosing, is the answer that the culture of optionality and permanent deferral most needs and most systematically avoids. He is not asking you to choose without thinking. He was one of the most careful thinkers who ever lived. He is asking you to notice the difference between the thinking that serves the choosing and the thinking that substitutes for it. Between the person who examines a commitment carefully before making it and the person who examines commitments indefinitely in order never to have to make one. Between the genuine either/, or that your life is currently presenting, and the managed uncertainty that keeps the genuine either/, or from ever having to be resolved. Here is what Søren Kierkegaard asks of you, practically, today. First, name the either/, or you have been managing rather than making. Not the small decisions. The genuine one. The choice that your life is currently presenting about a relationship, a direction, a commitment, a way of being, that you have been keeping open because the keeping open feels safer than the choosing. The either/, or that produces the specific, familiar, thoroughly Kierkegaardian vertigo when you look at it directly. The one you have been filling with information gathering, with more thinking, with the reasonable and responsible and entirely avoidant practice of researching your way around a choice that cannot be researched away. Name it. Write it down in the form of the actual either/, or not the pros and cons list, but the two things that cannot both be chosen. Because naming the genuine either/, or is the beginning of understanding what the anxiety is actually about. And understanding what it is about is the first step toward standing in it rather than managing it. Second, sit with the anxiety instead of resolving it. This is Kierkegaard's most countercultural practical instruction, and the one the modern world is least prepared to follow. The anxiety that accompanies the genuine choice is not a signal that something is wrong with you or with the choice. It is the signal that the choice is real, that it matters, that it will change you, that you are standing at the threshold of something that is genuinely yours to decide. Do not immediately reach for the distraction or the resolution or the additional information that will make the vertigo stop. Sit with it for long enough that you can begin to distinguish between the anxiety of the genuine threshold, the dizziness of freedom that Kierkegaard describes, and the anxiety of the person who has been at the threshold for too long and has begun to confuse the dizziness with evidence that jumping is wrong. The dizziness does not go away when the choice is right. It goes away when the choice is made. That is Kierkegaard's promise, and it is empirically available. The person who has made a genuine commitment, who has jumped, will tell you that the vertigo did not end because certainty arrived. It ended because the choosing did, because the threshold was behind them, because the freedom that had been producing the anxiety was now being expressed in the commitment, which is the only form in which freedom becomes something you can actually live inside of rather than merely stand before. Third, make one commitment you have been deferring and refuse to reopen it. This is what Kierkegaard meant by repetition, not doing the same thing over and over, but the deep, interior renewal of a commitment that has been made and is continually rechosen. The marriage that is not merely continued but actively recommitted to. The vocation that is not merely persisted in but genuinely re-entered. The friendship that is not merely maintained but deliberately rechosen. Find one commitment, present or available, that you have been holding provisionally, and make it non-provisional, not by the grand gesture, but by the internal act of stopping the re-examination. By deciding that this commitment is not subject to further optimization, that you are not continuing to assess it against the alternatives, that you have chosen and you are living from the choice. The freedom this produces is different from the freedom of the open door. It is quieter, it is more demanding, and it is, Kierkegaard would say, more real. The freedom of the person who has used their freedom, who has exercised it in the only way that freedom can be exercised, which is by committing it to something, rather than merely possessing it in the abstract. Fourth, find your form of the leap. Kierkegaard's leap is not recklessness. It is not the abandonment of reason in favor of feeling. It is the recognition that certain things, the most important things, cannot be reached by reason alone. That the commitment to a person, a vocation, a set of values, a way of living cannot be derived from an argument. That the person who waits for the proof that the leap is the right one will wait forever, because the proof is not available in advance. It is available only in retrospect, to the person who has already jumped. Find the place in your life where the leap is available, where the commitment is genuinely possible, where the either/or is real, where the choice would be genuine and genuinely change you, and where you have been standing at the threshold long enough that the dizziness has become familiar rather than instructive. And ask whether the familiar dizziness is telling you that jumping is wrong, or whether it is telling you, with the specific, honest, accurate signal that Kierkegaard spent his whole life learning to read, that you are at the threshold of something real, and that the only way through the vertigo is the one he always said it was: the jump. I want to close with the image I keep returning to when I think about Kierkegaard. Not the pseudonyms, not the broken engagement or the fight with the church or the collapse in the street. The desk, the Copenhagen apartment, the philosopher who wrote more than almost anyone in his century, who published under false names because he wanted the arguments to be received on their own terms rather than on the authority of his name, who poured into the work everything that his life had given him to work with: the father's guilt, the broken engagement, the melancholy that ran through his family like a geological feature, the faith that he could not simplify and could not release. He was 31 when he wrote about the dizziness of freedom. He was writing, as he always wrote, about himself, about the specific, personal, entirely real experience of standing at the threshold of a life that he had to choose, knowing that the choosing was his and that the dizziness was the proof of it. He had broken the engagement. He had made the either/or. He had jumped in the direction of the work, knowing what it cost, knowing what it would always cost, knowing that the leap was the only form of freedom that the genuine human life had ever had access to. He did not tell you it would be comfortable. He told you it would be real, and that the real thing, the committed, chosen, genuine, anxiety-surviving thing, is the only thing worth being. Here is the question Søren Kierkegaard leaves us with today. Not from Copenhagen, not from the pseudonyms, or the leap, or the 42 years that were not enough to finish what he had started. From the threshold, from the specific, familiar, entirely personal place in your life where the either/or is real and the dizziness is accurate and the choice is genuinely yours to make. What is the commitment you have been standing before? Not examining it, you have examined it. Standing before it, at the threshold, feeling the vertigo of the genuine freedom that is waiting to be exercised in the only form that freedom can be exercised in. And what would it feel like to stop standing at the edge and jump? Leave that in the comments. Because naming the threshold, even briefly, even to strangers, is the beginning of the Kierkegaardian practice. Not the leap itself. The honest acknowledgement that you are at the edge of one, and that the dizziness you feel is not a reason to step back. It is the proof that what you are standing before is real. I'll see you in the next one.